Hello, friends. If you love houseplants, dream of fuller garden beds, grow in a small backyard, on a balcony, or even in heavy, stubborn soil that never seems to improve, then this is for you. Maybe you've bought bag after bag of premium soil, hoping this season would finally be the one. Maybe you've watched your plants start strong, then slow down, fade out, and demand more fertilizer, more money, and more effort just to survive. A few years ago, I did exactly the same thing. I spent hundreds on beautiful bags of raised bed soil, filled my new boxes, and felt proud of how clean and perfect everything looked. But that pride did not last. By the second year, that expensive soil had sunk, dried out, and turned lifeless. My tomatoes struggled. My beds felt empty. And I realized I had made one of the biggest mistakes a gardener can make. I was buying something that looked rich instead of building something truly alive. And that changes everything, because real soil is not just something you fill a bed with. It is a living system. I'll show you how to stop wasting money on dead dirt and start creating deep, fertile living soil the natural way. If that sounds like the kind of garden you want, let's dig into it. Before we talk about how to build truly healthy soil, we need to clear up one of the biggest misunderstandings in modern gardening. A lot of people believe that if a bag says raised bed soil or premium garden mix, then it must be the right foundation for strong, productive plants. But the truth is, most bag soil is designed to be sold fast, stacked high, and moved easily, not to function like the living earth your plants actually need. Real topsoil is not something that appears overnight. Nature takes years, even centuries, to build it. It forms slowly through the breakdown of leaves, roots, minerals, fungi, microbes, moisture, and time. That rich, dark, crumbly soil we all dream about is the result of a living process. So when we see soil sold like a quick consumer product, we should pause and ask a simple question. What are we really paying for? In many cases, we are paying for a blend of wood waste, peat-based filler, perlite, sand, and partially broken down material that may look soft at first, but does not behave like mature living soil. One of the biggest problems is that these mixes often contain too much undecomposed woody matter. And when that happens, the microbes begin pulling nitrogen from the surrounding environment just to break it down. That means, instead of feeding your vegetables, your soil starts competing with them. Your plants look hungry, pale, and slow, and you end up reaching for fertilizer again and again just to keep them going. And there is another issue gardeners do not talk about enough. Once these bags are processed, sealed, stacked, and stored, much of the biological life that makes soil valuable is either reduced or completely missing. So what you bring home may fill a bed, but it does not create an ecosystem. It gives you volume, not vitality. And once that illusion wears off, you are left with sinking beds, tired plants, and the feeling that you have to keep buying your way out of the problem. But the good news is there is a better path, and gardeners have known it for a very long time. If bag soil is not the answer, then how do you start a productive garden? Especially if your ground is compacted, grassy, or hard like brick. This is where we can learn from one of the smartest gardening traditions of the past. Long before modern stores turned gardening into a shopping habit, people were growing abundant food by building soil from whatever nature and the household already provided. They did not wait for perfect ground. They created it. One of the most practical methods is often called sheet composting, or more simply lasagna gardening. And it works because it does not fight the land underneath. It works with it. Instead of digging everything up, hauling soil in, and trying to replace what is there, you begin by covering the surface and building new life on top. That is such an important shift in thinking. You are no longer trying to force the ground to become something else overnight. You are creating the conditions for life to move in and do the work for you. The first step is simple. Lay plain brown cardboard over the grass or weeds, making sure the pieces overlap so light cannot sneak through. Then soak it well. This layer helps smother unwanted growth, but more than that, it starts the invitation. Moist cardboard becomes food for earthworms and soil organisms below. They begin rising up from the native ground, feeding, tunneling, and connecting the old soil to the new layer you are building. Then comes the part that changes everything. You start layering your materials the way you would build a compost pile right in place. A layer of dry leaves, straw, or other carbon-rich material. Then, a layer of kitchen scraps, fresh grass clippings, or other nitrogen-rich greens. Then, another layer of browns. Then greens again. Water each layer as you go and let the whole bed settle into a moist, balanced system. Over time, those layers begin to soften, collapse, and transform into a deep, rich growing space full of biological activity. What I love about this method is that it completely changes how you see so-called waste. Autumn leaves are no longer mess. Grass clippings are no longer something to throw away. Even plain cardboard becomes part of the growing cycle. Little by little, you stop buying fertility and start building it. Once you have created that living surface layer, the next question becomes just as important. How do you protect it without destroying all the progress you have made? This is where many gardeners accidentally undo their own success. They finally build soft, rich, active soil, and then the next season, they dig it, turn it, break it apart, and expose everything that was quietly working beneath the surface. We were taught that digging means caring, that the more we disturb the soil, the more productive the garden will be. But in reality, healthy soil is not improved by constant disruption. It is improved by stability. No-dig gardening is powerful because it respects the structure nature is already building for you. Beneath the surface, fungi are connecting particles of soil. Worms are tunneling through it. Microbes are cycling nutrients through every layer. Moisture is being held more evenly. When you till or dig deeply, you interrupt that entire system. You break fungal pathways, expose buried weed seeds to light, and dry out the natural structure that allows roots to move easily and breathe. That is why some of the most productive gardens in the world are maintained with a surprisingly gentle approach. Instead of turning the ground over each season, you simply feed the top. A fresh layer of compost spread across the surface is often enough to keep the system moving in the right direction. Rain carries nutrients down. Worms pull organic matter deeper. The soil becomes more open, more resilient, and easier to manage year after year. And the beauty of this method is not just in the harvest. It is in how much calmer gardening becomes. You spend less time fighting weeds, less time dragging tools around, and less time exhausting yourself trying to control every inch of the bed. The garden starts to feel more balanced, more forgiving, and more alive. You begin to understand that good soil is not something you conquer. It is something you support. Once you see that, you are ready for the next step. Because this same principle of renewal can also bring old, tired potting soil back to life. And that brings us to something so many gardeners ask once the growing season ends. What about containers? What about all that old potting mix sitting in tired pots on the patio, the porch, or the balcony? Do you really have to dump it out and start over every single year? In most cases, absolutely not. Old potting soil is not useless. It is simply exhausted. It has lost structure, lost airspace, and given up much of the nutrition and life that once helped your plants thrive. But that does not mean its story is over. Over time, potting mixes naturally settle and break down. What once felt light and fluffy becomes dense, compacted, and a little lifeless. You may even notice the soil level dropping lower and lower in the pot, or a pale crust forming on the surface from mineral buildup and repeated watering. That is normal. The mistake is thinking that tired soil must be thrown away, when in reality it can often be renewed with just a few simple steps. Start by emptying your old containers into a large tub, wheelbarrow, or any space where you can work the mix comfortably. Pull out the old root masses, shake loose what soil you can save from them, and remove any thick clumps that have not broken down well. If there is a crust of salts or hard material on top, scrape that away too. What you want now is a clean base ready to breathe again. To bring that mix back to life, you need to restore two things at once: structure and biology. If it feels dense or heavy, mix in some fresh materials such as coconut coir or perlite to open it up and improve drainage. Then comes the most important part, bringing life back into it. A generous amount of compost or worm castings can completely change the energy of that soil. Suddenly, it is no longer just holding roots in place. It is feeding them again. And if you want to push that recovery even further, you can moisten the mix with a diluted blend of liquid seaweed and a little molasses. That simple combination helps wake up microbial life and gives beneficial organisms a reason to multiply. In a surprisingly short time, that dull, spent potting mix begins to feel rich again, soft again, usable again. And once you start reusing soil this way, you stop seeing containers as a constant expense. You start seeing them as part of a living cycle. That same shift in perspective becomes even more powerful when we look at one of the most overlooked gifts nature drops at our feet every autumn. Every year, as the seasons turn, something remarkable happens in neighborhoods everywhere. Trees release an enormous gift, and most people treat it like a problem. They rake leaves into piles, stuff them into plastic bags, drag them to the curb, and then later go out and spend money on mulch, compost, or fertilizer. Once you really understand soil, that cycle becomes hard to watch because fallen leaves are not waste. They are one of the most valuable soil-building materials you will ever have access to. Hidden inside a pile of old leaves is the beginning of something extraordinary: leaf mold. And unlike hot compost, which is mostly driven by bacteria and fast decomposition, leaf mold is made slowly through fungi. This is a quieter process, but in many ways, it is even more powerful. Fungi are some of the greatest builders in the natural world. Their fine white threads move through organic matter and soil, binding loose particles together, improving texture, and helping create that dark, crumbly structure gardeners are always trying to achieve. This matters even more if your soil is heavy, sticky, or compacted. Fungal activity helps loosen that kind of ground over time, not by forcing it open, but by creating pathways through it. And when leaf mold is added to beds, borders, or containers, it acts like a sponge, helping the soil hold moisture far more evenly. In dry periods, that can make an enormous difference. Your plants suffer less stress, your watering becomes more effective, and the soil stays cooler and more stable. What makes leaf mold so beautiful is how little effort it asks from you. You gather leaves, pile them in a quiet corner, or contain them in a simple wire bin, and then you let time do the rest. Rain, fungi, air, and patience take over. Months later, or sometimes a year or two down the road, those crisp leaves are transformed into a dark, earthy material that feels soft in the hand and smells like the forest floor. That is the sign of something truly alive. And once you have used leaf mold even once, it changes how you see the whole garden. You realize that fertility is not something you have to keep buying in bags. It is already falling from the sky season after season. But of course, not everyone has a yard full of autumn leaves or the space to let them break down slowly. So the next question is important. What if you live in an apartment or garden from a balcony and still want to turn everyday waste into rich living soil? This is where indoor gardeners and small space growers get to step into the story in a big way. Because even if you do not have a backyard, even if your growing space is just a balcony, a sunny window, or a few containers outside the kitchen door, you can still build fertility at home. One of the smartest ways to do that is through a method called bokashi. Bokashi works differently from the composting most people are familiar with. Instead of letting food scraps rot in an open pile, this method ferments them inside a sealed container using beneficial microorganisms. That difference matters. Fermentation is faster, cleaner, and much easier to manage in compact living spaces. It also allows you to process food scraps that regular compost systems often struggle with, including cooked food, dairy, and small amounts of meat. For people living in apartments or urban homes, that opens up a whole new world of possibility. The process itself is simple. As you collect food scraps, You place them in an airtight bucket and sprinkle bokashi bran over each layer. That bran carries the microbial culture that drives the fermentation. Over the next couple of weeks, the scraps begin to pickle rather than decay. You are not creating finished compost yet. What you are creating is a pre-digested microbially active material that soil life can break down very quickly once it is buried. And this is where the magic really happens. Instead of throwing that fermented material away, you use it to build what I like to think of as a small soil factory. Take a plastic tote or storage bin. Add a layer of old potting soil. Then your bokashi scraps. Then more soil on top. Leave it in a warm corner on a balcony or anywhere protected where the microbes can keep working. In just a few weeks, the food waste begins disappearing into the soil, transformed by microbial life into something dark, fertile, and full of potential. What I love most about this method is how empowering it feels. Your kitchen scraps stop being trash. Your old potting soil stops being dead weight. Even in a small apartment, you are creating a cycle of renewal. You are making soil, not buying it. And once you realize that fertility can be grown in a bin just as surely as tomatoes can be grown in a pot, you begin to understand something bigger. Healthy soil is not about space. It is about systems. It is about learning how life feeds life, whether in a large garden bed or in the corner of a city balcony. And now we come to the question so many gardeners are waiting for, especially those who already spent good money filling raised beds with bag soil that now feels flat, dry, and lifeless. Do you need to dig it all out and start over? Not at all. In most cases, what your bed is missing is not space, and it is not volume. It is biology. It is the living community that turns ordinary material into fertile, resilient soil. And one of the most fascinating ways to reintroduce that life is through what I think of as a forest inoculation. For generations, experienced growers understood something we have largely forgotten. A healthy woodland floor is one of the greatest models of soil building on Earth. Nothing is tilled there. Nothing is force-fed. Leaves fall. Roots grow. Fungi spread. Organisms feed. And year after year, the soil becomes richer, darker, softer, and more alive. That is the pattern we want to borrow. A small amount of healthy woodland soil can act like a starter culture for a struggling garden bed. Just beneath a loose layer of dry leaves in an undisturbed natural area, you often find dark, crumbly material full of microbial life and fungal activity. When a little of that biology is introduced to the surface of a raised bed, it can help reconnect that bed to the wider logic of nature. Suddenly, the soil is no longer sitting there as an isolated product. It is beginning to function more like a living system again. And that is the part that still amazes me. In something as small as a handful of healthy soil, there can be an extraordinary world of life already at work. Bacteria, fungal threads, microscopic decomposers, and countless interactions we never even see. Once those living relationships begin expanding through a bed that was once sterile or depleted, the change can be surprisingly fast. Texture improves. Organic matter starts breaking down differently. Moisture holds more evenly. Plants respond with stronger, steadier growth. It is as if the bed finally wakes up. What makes this idea so powerful is that it reminds us we do not always need more products. Sometimes we need more life. We need to stop treating soil like an empty container and start treating it like a community. And once you understand that, you begin to see that building soil is about much more than improving a garden. It changes the way you think about your role in the natural world itself. Because in the end, this is about more than saving money on potting mix or finding a smarter way to fill a raised bed. When we stop buying dead dirt and start building soil, we step out of a cycle that teaches us to consume first and understand later. We begin returning to something older, quieter, and far more meaningful. We begin participating. That is one of the deepest lessons gardening has to offer. Soil is never just soil. It is memory, transformation, decay, renewal, and patience all happening at once. Every compost bucket, every layer of mulch, Every handful of leaf mold, every worm working unseen below the surface is part of a living exchange. And when we learn how to support that exchange instead of interrupting it, something changes not only in the garden, but in us. I have seen this again and again over the years. People begin gardening because they want better vegetables, healthier houseplants, or a more beautiful space outside the window. But somewhere along the way, they discover something larger. They find that working with the soil slows the mind. It teaches observation. It teaches humility. It teaches us that life does not respond well to force, but it responds beautifully to care. There is something profoundly healing about bringing dead ground back to life, watching hard soil soften, watching worms return, watching a place that once seemed empty begin to hum with growth again. In that process, many gardeners realize they are being restored too. Not in some dramatic instant way, but quietly, season by season, the same way the soil heals, through small acts repeated with patience. And maybe that is why this matters so much. Building your own soil teaches you that waste is rarely waste. It teaches you that abundance is not something you buy ready-made. It is something you build through attention, through trust in natural processes, and through a willingness to work with time instead of always trying to outrun it. The more we understand that, the more clearly we see that we are not separate from the earth beneath our feet. We are bound to it, and when we care for it well, it gives that care back in ways that go far beyond the harvest. So now I want to leave you with a question. After everything we have talked about today, what are you going to build with the ground beneath your feet? Maybe you are ready to layer a new bed and try the lasagna method for the first time. Maybe you are inspired to save your old potting mix and bring it back to life. Maybe you are going to start collecting autumn leaves, set up a simple bokashi system, or begin looking at your kitchen scraps in a completely different way. Whatever your next step is, I hope this helped you see soil differently. Not as something dead that comes in a plastic bag, but as something living that can be renewed, supported, and grown right where you are. And once you understand that, gardening becomes more than a hobby. It becomes a way of seeing the world. If this inspired you, let me know in the comments what method you want to try first. I would genuinely love to hear what you are building in your own garden, on your balcony, or around your home. If this story changed the way you look at the soil beneath your feet, or the waste in your kitchen, please subscribe to our channel. We are uncovering the natural wisdom and history that they have tried to bury. Let's cultivate a better future together. Our next treasure of knowledge will be opening soon. Like this video, and share it with a fellow gardener to help us grow this community. Keep growing, keep learning, and I will see you in the next one.